morning, and thank you for attending ITSM Academy's monthly web education. My name is Karen Skiles, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Today, we're pleased to have Donna Knapp, Curriculum Development Manager with ITSM Academy, joining us. Jane Grohl had a conflict in her schedule, so Donna graciously agreed to present for us, and her presentation is titled Modern Skills for the IT Professional. We have a lot of registrations for today's webinar, so let's just give everyone a few minutes to log in and get settled. Some of you may have firewalls blocking you from accessing the Citrix webinar tool that we use. If you would like a copy of the presentation, you can download the slides directly from the link in the chat box or from our website at www.itsmacademy.com/webinar-archives. And be sure to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for the latest IT service management updates and specials, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more free webinars and inspiration. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I'll be right back. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Skiles, and I'm pleased to be your host for today's webinar. We've been delivering our monthly web educations to you since 2007, and we're very happy to see so many of you joining us again for today's webinar. We're pleased to have Donna Knapp, Curriculum Development Manager with ITSM Academy, joining us. Jane Grohl had a conflict in her schedule, so Donna graciously agreed to present for us. Her presentation is titled Modern Skills for the IT Professional. You can download the slides directly from the link in the chat box or from our website at www.itsmacademy.com/webinar-archives. We'll be tweeting during this presentation as well. If you'd like to join in, please use hashtag AskITSM. Again, that's hashtag AskITSM. During the webinar, the information that Donna shares may raise some questions, or you might be looking for some additional clarification or information. We'll have a Q&A session with Donna at the end of the presentation. So please submit your questions during the webinar using the question feature that appears in the GoToWebinar control panel, which is located in the upper right corner of your screen. Just type your question and click the send button. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll answer them during the Q&A session at the end of Donna's presentation. The webinar and the Q&A are being recorded and will be made available to you on our website by the end of business tomorrow. Now we're ready to get started. For those of you new to ITSM Academy, here's a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full-service provider of IT service management education. We develop most content in-house. Our portfolio includes ITIL, Agile Service Management, DevOps, Process Design, and Verisum. Since 2003, we've trained and certified tens of thousands of students. Now let's introduce today's speaker, Donna Knapp. Donna has more than 30 years of experience in the IT industry and is currently ITSM Academy's Curriculum Development Manager. She is an author, a lifelong learner with expertise in IT service management, Agile, Lean, and DevOps practices. Good morning, Donna.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. As Karen mentioned, I'm actually channeling my inner Jane Grohl today. This is Jane's presentation. I've added a couple of little things just to represent some of the things I'm thinking about these days. But for the most part, again, channeling my inner Jane. And we're sorry she can't be with us today. So we're going to talk about modern skills for IT professionals. And, you know, to some extent, the context of this has to do with DevOps and the transformation organizations are making to DevOps. I hope by now most of you are familiar with the DevOps Institute. The DevOps Institute is the continuous learning community for emerging DevOps practices. And I'd like to just poll everybody very, very quickly. Do you have a DevOps initiative underway? So if you can just kind of quickly respond to the poll, where are you in terms of being involved with DevOps? And I'm seeing already about 50+% of you are involved in a DevOps transformation in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to give it about 5 more seconds. Slowing down, slowing down. All right, that's good. So just to share with you what we've got. 42% of you have said yes, you've got some kind of transformation initiative underway. 4% are considering, so haven't started down the path yet. 29% saying no, which actually is a big number from my perspective. I'm a little bit surprised. And 25% not sure, and I understand that. It's very, very common to see that DevOps starts out a little bit as a pilot initiative, a little bit on the down low. And so absolutely DevOps could be going on in your organization and you're not really aware of it if it's not visible. So why is all of this so important? You've all heard this term, digital transformation. When we talk about the third industrial revolution, we talk about digital transformation. And really for a while now, organizations have been recognizing that software drives the world. And increasingly, organizations are looking at how can they speed up the delivery of software? How can they ensure that their software products are innovative and, you know, satisfying the needs of their customers and meeting customer expectations, with the understanding that those expectations are changing and they're changing constantly based on what else is going on in the industry. Your competitor is some little company out there that's doing some really innovative things and causing disruption in your industry. And as soon as, you know, a new idea arrives in the universe, then very, very quickly customers start clamoring for whatever is that next great thing. Migration to the cloud is absolutely accelerating. You know, there's a very logical series of steps that you see as organizations make the move to DevOps, for example. Very often it begins in some way, shape, or form with agile development methodologies, a move to the cloud. And what moving to the cloud means is we're removing the physical limitations that very often slow down our ability to develop and deliver software. And as soon as you deliver, remove those physical limitations, everything can speed up exponentially. Now, you don't want to speed up the delivery of poor quality products into your environments. And so you also then have to look at practices like DevOps that enable you to deliver speed and quality in the products that you're delivering. The reality is, and this is where Moore's law comes into play, every idea spawns 100 new ideas these days. And with practices like agile development practices and DevOps practices, those ideas can be introduced very, very quickly. So, and some of you have maybe heard me say this before, I've been in the IT industry for 30 years. I've said, wow, more in about the last 5 years than I did in 30 years in the industry, because there's just so many interesting things that are being introduced, so many awesome developments that truly are enabling technology to make our lives easier. And it's not going to slow down anytime soon. We have generations of young people in the workforce today and coming into the workforce who never knew life without, a smartphone in their hand, or never knew life without digital technologies. And, we can only imagine what they're going to do with all of that. We're also seeing, as all these things come together, the introduction of the concept of the fourth industrial revolution, which is really where we're going to fully see the promise of digital, and where we're going to recognize that technology is now embedded in everything we do. It's embedded in our societies, it's embedded in our work lives, in our home lives, it's increasingly embedded in our bodies, right? Technology is everywhere, and we have to, as an industry, in the IT industry, not only get really good at managing that technology effectively, but also keeping pace with innovation. So for your organizations, I appreciate that for some of you, you may still have traditional monolithic applications. Maybe you haven't yet gone to the cloud. And whenever I hear people, say, no, we haven't gone to the cloud, or no, we're not introducing DevOps, a lot of times in my mind, I think not yet, because it's coming. It's very much a mainstay in today's enterprises. So what does this all mean? It means we have to recognize that IT is a system of systems, and you really see where we have an agile, iterative, incremental approach to development, and very often we think of agile in the concept of Scrum, but agile certainly isn't the only agile development methodology. There are many, many others. Agile, and especially in combination with the cloud, has very much enabled us to introduce DevOps practices. I call them the continuouses. So practices like continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, and now increasingly continuous operation. So here is where we can very much start to automate the processes that we have in place for taking these, and let's remember, a product of Agile tends to be a smaller increment of change, these smaller increments of change, and automatically build and test and deploy and deliver this code into our production environment. And sometimes folks are a little bit scared by DevOps, and there's a little bit of a myth that, we now have a situation where a developer can push a button and automatically deploy code into the production environment. And that's not the case at all. One of the real advantages of DevOps is it introduces this notion of continuous testing, where in fact, before the developer starts coding with practices like test-driven development, we're starting to develop tests and perform tests that not only have to do with the code itself, they have to do with the environment that we're deploying into. They have to do with testing to ensure compliance with our different policies. We're increasingly hearing references to policy as code or compliance as code. So anything that historically you were able to do manually, whether by following a checklist, or by looking for some form of evidence to ensure compliance, we can now, as part of continuous testing, do that automatically. Now, you might think to yourself, well, so then does that mean IT service management goes away? No, not at all. You can see that DevOps practices are really underpinned by our IT service management practices. Many of you are familiar with ITIL as an IT service management framework. So we see the stages of the ITIL lifecycle: service strategy, design, transition, operation. We see many of the core IT service management practices are underpinning these continuous delivery and continuous deployment practices. And I think it's really important to understand that the what and why of IT service management really isn't changing. Why do we have a change management process in place? So that we can mitigate the risks associated with the beneficial changes that we're introducing. Why do we have release management processes? So we can not only ensure that we're doing adequate testing, but also we can ensure operational readiness, that we can ensure that our business is ready to receive that change. So the what and the why, that burning need for IT service management is still there. What has to change is the how. We have to adapt our IT service management processes in support of DevOps. And especially for those of you who maybe know that you've got some heavyweight processes in place, we have to look at how can we lighten up our processes, how can we streamline them, how can we make sure that these processes are achieving their objectives, because those objectives still are very much important, but how can we do it in the most lightweight way possible? Try saying that 3 times real fast. And then we see the emergence of this concept of continuous operations. And increasingly, we're hearing organizations that talk about things like zero downtime deployments, where we're moving beyond that need to have a release window, and maybe as we did historically, where we had, a releases that could only be done on the weekends so that we minimize business impact. In today's global society, where many organizations are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we really have to be looking at how we can always be available and how we can ensure that we're very, very quickly, if something goes wrong, able to either restore service or optimally prevent that failure from ever actually impacting the customer. We are increasingly talking about self-healing components in our infrastructures, for example, where there's never really any business impact, and that's really critical. Availability has always been important. One of my first jobs in IT, I had to produce availability statistics, right? And this was, I don't know, the 1970s sometime, probably early 1980s. And so availability has always been important, but here's the reality today. When our systems aren't available, real dollars are being, lost. Real lives could potentially be lost. Real reputations can be lost. Brands can be significantly impacted, especially, as these outages make the news, make the headlines, make it into the Twitter sphere. So we have to think very, very differently about continuous operation. What DevOps helps us do is to, again, deliver high quality products very, very quickly into our production environments. But we still have this long ongoing run phase where we've got to keep those systems up and running and keep the trains running on time, as I like to say. And so we're seeing now emerging the idea of site reliability engineering. Site reliability engineering is not necessarily new. The concept's been around for, I don't know, 7 years or so. But we're really now seeing it finding its way into mainstream enterprises. In fact, I always credit the fact that I first learned about site reliability engineering from someone who worked at Home Depot, right? So, whereas historically we know that this kind of stuff comes out of the Googles of the world and the Netflixes and the Facebooks of the world, increasingly site reliability engineering practices are coming into the enterprise. So what does that mean? Site reliability is all about applying engineering practices to what were traditionally IT operations practices. So looking at, processes like incident management and how we can use engineering practices to address how we're handling incidents, how we're hopefully proactively preventing incidents, or how we're restoring service very, very quickly if something goes wrong. And it's really very much a reflection of what's going on throughout the industry, and that is moving away from manual practices and moving towards automation in everything we do, whether it's our IT service management processes, whether it's our continuous delivery and deployment practices, and or it's our operational practices like incident and problem and knowledge management. So we can see these very, very strong influences coming together: Agile, DevOps, site reliability engineering, and the granddaddy of all influences is Lean. So you can see here the reflection of the value stream. Let's make sure that we understand from the point at which there's an idea to update a product or a service through to when we are in fact delivering value to our customers. Let's make sure that we understand this collection of systems that underpins that value stream and look at how we can optimize across that value stream. Very often, historically in IT, we have sub-optimized. So we've gotten really good at one particular part of our value stream, but if we're not making improvements in other areas of the value stream as well, we're going to run into trouble. And we know this. We know that Agile has done a very, very good job of helping organizations speed up the delivery lifecycle. But if we're not using things like DevOps practices, and if we're not adapting our IT service management processes, then these are going to start to be a big constraint within that value stream. One of the things that's also important to understand is that very often what is a constraint in a value stream are these kind of gaps between our processes, and maybe we could say between our silos within our IT organization historically. So we have grown up in IT with a very ticket-like culture where there's tickets that you have to raise in order to move from one stage to another, or there's gates that you have to pass through that involve some type of documentation, and very often we have lots of work in progress that's kind of sitting between these different stages of the value stream, and that's very often where waste is created in our organizations, where you've got too much work in progress. So what Lean helps us to understand is where that waste is and how we can then optimize flow end to end across this IT value stream. And then, oh, by the way, back again, right? Because we want to make sure that we're taking feedback and we're passing it back to our development organizations, to our operation organizations, and looking at moving what we're doing. So wherever you work in an IT organization today, it's very important that you understand that this is where the industry is. And I'm an educator, so I think it's important to understand the history of Agile, understand a little bit about the history of DevOps, and understand how we got here. Because some organizations are saying, this doesn't relate to us, or we've been doing this, and the question becomes, do you really fully understand the relationship between these systems, and also, do you understand how these systems have evolved over the years? DevOps today is very different than DevOps was 10 years ago, when the term was first coined. The folks who were the earliest adopters of DevOps have now moved on. Right now, they don't necessarily use the term DevOps anymore. They've moved on to now looking at practices like site reliability engineering. So know that these systems constantly evolve, and we all in this industry today need to stay up on what's going on. So what does this require of us in terms of skills? It really requires us to look at not only the breadth of knowledge that we have relative to the industry we're in, but also the depth of knowledge. And I think it's likely that some of you have seen this notion of I-shaped and T-shaped and pie-shaped people before. It's, I think, important to understand that if you came up, in the work world, prior to Generation X coming into the workforce, you really were raised to be a specialist. It's kind of how we did things historically in the work world. You chose a specialty, you got really, really good at that specialty. Gosh, before the baby boomers, you went to work at a company and you stayed at that company, and maybe you did that same job most of your career. So historically, we anybody baby boomer or older was brought up to be a specialist. We're starting to see now recognition of this need to move to more of a T-shaped skill set. And what a T-shaped skill set really speaks to is the fact that you've got generalist knowledge and specialist knowledge. That generalist knowledge can span a lot of different things. It can span, an understanding of you're in the business that you're in, the business strategies, the business that you're in, the products that they develop, the services that they provide. It can be just an understanding of these concepts like Agile and DevOps and IT service management, project management, for example. So maybe you have a good general knowledge of project management practices, and you understand how Agile is different than traditional waterfall project management. And then again, you've got, this area of expertise where you are very much a specialist in some particular area. So it might be that you're an architect, you're a designer, so you're really good at designing systems, or you're good at engineering. Maybe you're a developer, you have good development skills, operational skills, right? But you're an expert in some particular area, and it might be relative to some particular technology. Now, here's where we all have to start to look at our skills and start to understand that chances are something that we've been a specialist in, especially if you've been a specialist for quite a number of years, is evolving. That technology is evolving. That way of working is evolving. And so we have to make sure that we're evolving our skill sets as we go along, so that we continue to be a specialist. We don't rest on our laurels. We don't, and I get it. People have worked their whole entire careers working hard to become a specialist and to be viewed as a specialist in a particular area. But again, if you're not keeping up with modern day practices, then you may find yourself in a little bit of trouble. So from an education standpoint, I like to think about it in terms of these generalist skills come to you through education. Herein lies the difference between education and training. Your specialist skills come to you through training. So education, let's make sure we understand the what and the why. Why is this important, right? What role does it play? Whether it's in, your industry or in, relative to your job. And then that how you do things is going to come through typically more specialized training in some way, shape, or form. So pie shape then says you have multiple areas of specialization. Maybe at some point in your career, you moved from one part of IT to another part of IT. You started out working in the development world. You started to move into the operations side of the house, or vice versa. Pie-shaped could also come through evolution. So maybe historically you've been a great system administrator, and in the traditional infrastructure days, you were really good at maintaining the hardware itself. And as your organization introduces things like DevOps practices, you become an expert in automation practices. You become an expert in configuration management technologies, and the automation that goes into things like the provisioning of digital technology. So you learn about things like infrastructure as code and how to provision things automatically as software. And then we have this idea of comb-shaped people, and it's important to understand, and it's pretty widely recognized, that once you get, and this picture doesn't necessarily illustrate it effectively, but when you move to this comb-shaped like skill set, you may not have the same depth of knowledge. So there should maybe actually be a little cutoff point here where you've got varying depth of knowledge in these different specialization areas. And this is a little bit tough, especially for the folks who kind of grew up in this world where, your goal was always to be the top of the heap and the best of the best. We came up, I'm a baby boomer, so I came up in that generation where we used to hear the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. And what is really, I think, being recognized today is that's okay. On a cross-functional team, if you at least have some expertise and you're good at collaborating with others, you can continue to improve that depth of knowledge. You can continue to contribute, and quite frankly, you can contribute in a lot of different ways to a cross-functional team. You just have to get good at always being willing to learn, always being willing to ask for help when you need it, so that depth of knowledge might not be as deep as it would be if you were only specializing in one particular area. But again, you can wear lots of different hats and play lots of different roles on a team, given, based on what a team needs at any given point in time. Some of you may be familiar with the name Patrick Dubois. Patrick actually coined the term DevOps. And one of Patrick's personal goals was actually to work in every different part of IT throughout his career. So he, worked in development, he worked in operations, he worked in the testing environment. So while I've never had the opportunity to ask him, I would suggest somebody like Patrick would be a comb-shaped person, because he really set out very intentionally to expose himself to these different areas of IT so that he could learn about them and so that he could help. And I think this is what comb-shaped people can bring to an organization. They can then help the organization more effectively collaborate, break down those silos, work across those different areas within an organization. So it is important that increasingly this breadth of knowledge is just as important as depth of knowledge. And we have talked through for years about this idea of understanding people and processes and technology, having kind of that holistic view and that holistic understanding of what's happening. And today we also need to add the understanding of business strategies to this generalist knowledge, understanding again what business you're in, what makes your company competitive, what sets your company apart from every other company. Simon Sinek says start with why. Start with why your company exists, what its purpose is, and make sure that everything you're doing is contributing to that purpose and helping your organization to achieve and to realize that purpose. And as technologies evolve, it's also very, very important that we understand cultural considerations. You know, the core values of DevOps are culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing, and it begins very much with culture. So we have to all understand that not only is all the technology we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis changing, but organizations are changing. They're changing how they are structured, and they're working hard to change the culture and the values and the behaviors within their organizations. So what are the skills that we need? We need to, first of all, understand this concept of a value stream. And remember that a big part of what a value stream is about is looking at end to end. It's said that wherever there's a product, there's a value stream. You sometimes hear it said wherever there's demand for a product or service, there is a value stream. But it really begins with understanding and taking that big picture perspective. Sometimes we're so busy and we get really zoned in on focusing on our little job and trying to be really good at, you know, our one little peak part of that value stream. But we can best contribute when we kind of take a look around and we really understand what role we play in the context of this greater value stream. And then also understanding, again, people, the processes that underpin that value stream, and then the technologies, and more specifically today, the automation practices that we can put in place in order to deliver value, high quality value, more quickly. So here you see again that need to think about culture, that understanding that today there's very much this synergy between Agile and DevOps and IT service management and Lean. Hopefully, we've all come around to understanding that there's no or in this conversation. It's not, you know, IT service management or DevOps or Agile or Lean. All of these bring influences to our work world today that are all benefiting and significantly benefiting high performing organizations. So the more we understand about, you know, Lean, about the concept of a value stream, and how to, if not how to actually facilitate designing a value stream, understanding how to contribute to laying out your current state value stream and understanding that current state, and then being able to contribute to a future state. We have a webinar coming up. I'm not actually sure of the date. I meant to check on it, but I'm going to do a webinar coming up shortly that's called Anatomy of a Value Stream. So I'm actually going to talk about what a value stream is, and kind of how, what are the elements of a value stream, and how people can contribute to designing a value stream, whether you're the one facilitating a session or you're simply participating in a session, what that value stream looks like and the role that we play in laying out that value stream. And that's an important thing to understand. You know, the skills that you need are going to be based on the role that you play. So, you know, chances are you're already working on some kind of an Agile project. You might be a Scrum Master, you might be a member of the team, but you still need to understand the Agile development, you know, methodology that you're using, Scrum, for example, or, you know, some form of Kanban that you're using. So you need to hone your skills in that particular area, just so you can be a good contributor to that particular team. If you're a process owner today, in IT service management or a process manager or process practitioner in any way, shape, or form, you absolutely need to be educating yourself on Agile and DevOps and Lean, because they're very, very much influencing IT service management today. So when we look at, all right, how do we understand how to work in this new world order? One of the things that you can do is groom your cultural skills and educate yourself a little bit about the cultural trends that are occurring within organizations today and what those trends represent. Now, one of the things that I always think is fascinating is understanding that some of these concepts, like systems thinking, and some of these cultural concepts, have been around for a while. Westrom, Lalou, they've been doing work for years looking at organizations and how to reinvent organizations and how to transform the culture of your organization. So there's a lot of information out there about organizational change management and the skills that are needed, but there's some very specific concepts and trends that are starting to emerge. So Westrom, and many of you may be familiar with his work, he actually looked at, specifically in safety environments, how information flows. So he introduced the idea that you may have a culture that is very bureaucratic, and so it's very command and control, where the leaders in the organization kind of tell everybody what to do and everybody follows along. You may have a very, very rules-based, what Westrom calls pathological organization, where everything that you do is really influenced by the leaders within your organization, and as those leaders change, how your organization functions changes. But it's very much the kind of culture where the leadership decides how things are going to work, through to a generative culture, which is what we're really seeing emerge in organizations, especially organizations that are introducing DevOps practices. Generative is a trait of a high-performing organization, and some of the key concepts are that information flows very, very freely. There's constant sharing of information. There's very much a blameless culture. So whereas in some cultures there's very much a shoot the messenger notion, to where it's, if you're delivering bad news, you're actually gonna get blamed for it. In a generative environment, you've got very much a blameless environment, and people feel safe. It's a very safe environment that people feel that they can speak up and they can speak their mind, and that there's a desire and a willingness to share and collaborate and work together within the organization. These organizations also look at innovation in a very in a way that encourages innovation. So rather than being risk adverse, and rather than being unwilling to introduce new ideas, perhaps you've got a failure is not an option type of culture. In a generative environment, there's very much a willingness to experiment in a safe way and in an intelligent way, but to experiment and to innovate. And hey, if somebody has an idea, let's try it. And if it doesn't work out, at least we're going to learn, and we're maybe going to be able to figure out a better way of doing things. Lalou has very similar concepts, and he, honed some of Westrom's ideas a little bit to talk about really some key concepts. And one of that is the notion that with freedom comes responsibility. So how can we empower people? How can we create autonomy within our organizations? How can we establish a high trust culture? And in fact, both Westrom and Lalou talk very much about the desire and and they challenge organizations to look at how can they move to this high trust environment. And again, a lot of that comes from information sharing and from, having that blameless type of an environment where people are kind of taught that it's okay to speak up. It's okay if you made a mistake. Let's make sure that you kind of very quickly make people aware of that so that we can address what needs to be addressed, and we can then figure out how to help you so that next time around you don't make a similar mistake. Lulu also very much, he introduces something called the advice process. One of the things he says is that, look, nobody gets to make decisions on their own. If you have an idea for making a change, if you have a suggestion, then you have to seek advice from the people who are experts in that particular area and the people who are going to be impacted by that particular decision and that new way of working. So he very much encourages moving away from a traditional command and control environment where managers and leaders go in a room somewhere and they make some decisions and then they come out and tell everybody, okay, this is how we're going to start doing things. And he encourages that, again, autonomy and that engagement and that collaboration, as a part of the decision-making process. In the 2017 State of DevOps report, you saw the introduction of transformational leadership, and transformational leadership really recognizes the idea that when you've got these big, massive changes like DevOps represents, having individuals who are really good at communicating what the vision is, helping everybody understand, Cotter used to say, create that sense of urgency, help everybody understand why it's imperative that we move to this new way of working, and also helping people to understand the role that they play in the transformation and how to navigate their way through the transformation. A little bit different than coaching, although the two go hand in hand. And a big difference is that with transformational leadership, what the transformational leader is looking to do is help people understand how they align to this new vision, right? How they align to the transformation and how that transformation is going to benefit the business. What coaching does is help people understand how to be the best they can be, right, in their given role. So we have many, many different forms of coaching occurring in organizations today. In some organizations, there's actually leadership coaches, right? Individuals who are really good at helping individuals emerge as these transformational leaders. Some of you might be agile coaches. Some of you might be, coaches who are working with individuals to help them hone their DevOps related practices. In some organizations that are introducing DevOps, they have learning labs or they have dojos where there are people who are experts in these DevOps practices who are coaching others and helping them learn these new ways of working. For those of you who are supervisors or managers today, and you're already hearing that we're moving to more of a coaching approach to managing individuals than that, again, traditional command and control where you make all the decisions and you tell everybody exactly how you want things done. Anybody who's ever worked for somebody who's a micromanager, you know what this looks like. To empowering people to figure out how best to work and how best to hone their skills and improve in any areas that require improvement. Now, why is all of this important? It's important because increasingly IT organizations are moving to this organizational structure that involves more product-oriented teams, more autonomous and cross-functional teams. Now, the most common, version of that was introduced by Spotify. So you may have heard about the Spotify model. Spotify introduces this notion of squads and tribes, and you might not call them squads and tribes in your organization, and that's okay. But essentially, squads and tribes are these autonomous cross-functional teams that are organized around a business capability in some way, shape, or form. So I always like to use the example of a banking organization where maybe there's the traditional financial services like checking and savings type services. Then maybe also there's an investment part of your organization, and typically they require, maybe there's a loan part of your organization. They typically require different sets of capabilities. They have different underpinning technologies. So these squads and tribes are organized around these business capabilities. The tribe is the greater organizational structure, and there may be many squads within a given tribe, but they're organized around business capability. And again, these are cross-functional teams. So it's how organizations today are breaking down those traditional IT silos where we've got dev and we've got QA and we've got ops and we've got security, and they butt heads constantly. And there's a lot of waste as we're trying to pass work from one of these different silos to another. Within these squads, they've got the dev skills, they've got the operational skills, they've got the QA skills, they've got the security skills, right? All together within that squad, within that team. And so they're able to move much more quickly because we've eliminated many of the handoffs that occur as we try to take work across many silos. They also have, and that doesn't mean that there's not kind of the traditional areas of specialization. They also have something called chapters, and chapters and people who are in chapters, aligned with chapters, work within squads, right? But here's where the specialization is. So these are the people who are specialists in, traditional database practices or automation practices. Increasingly the pipeline, the continuous delivery and continuous deployment practices that are really so much of a mainstay of organizations today that are introducing DevOps. So there's still those teams of people who work together and hone their expertise, who are in fact specialists in a given particular area, but that knowledge gets embedded into a cross-functional team, into a squad. And they also introduce this concept of guilds. Now, conceptually, we've had guilds for a long time. You might call them communities of interest. You might call them communities of excellence. So this idea that anybody who's interested in learning more about a particular area, or anybody who's interested in contributing to how we can improve or how we can evolve a particular area, comes together, works together, collaborates together outside of your organizational structure. So this doesn't have anything to do with kind of traditional line management, organizational structure practices. It's really working across different parts of the business to come together and look at new ways of doing things. So these are some of the terms and concepts that you're probably already hearing, this idea of product-oriented or business capability-oriented cross-functional teams, the idea of transformation and transformational leadership and coaching. And certainly in the case of Westrom and Lelou, probably the thing they both hold in common is this idea of moving to a higher trust environment, to ensuring that we're looking to improve the flow of information and how we collaborate and communicate with each other within an organization. And that's really a big part of what culture is all about, is changing the way people behave, changing the way that people work together and how they interact. And when you change how people behave, you also start to change how they feel about an organization. So if you have an organization where maybe historically it's been very combative, there's just this age-old, core chronic conflict, Gene Kim calls it, between the dev and the ops organization. And some of that has to do with just historically how we've been incented. If you can break down some of these walls, and if you can improve the communication, improve the collaboration, then people are going to just feel better about coming into work on any given day, and they're going to feel better about going to meetings. We're going to hopefully break down that dread that sometimes occurs when you're walking into a meeting and you're thinking to yourself, this isn't going to be pretty. Let's break that down, and let's let people really have fun. And enjoy what they're doing. So if this is what the culture in organizations is looking like already in some of your organizations, or is moving to for some of your organizations, then what does that mean to each of us individually, right? Because these are big themes, right? High trust and product-oriented teams. But how does that affect how each and every one of us thinks about how we work with others and what we bring to the workforce? So what we need to be doing is looking at honing our soft and our self-management skills. And this particular article by the World Economic Forum looked at 10 skills you'll need by 2020 to work effectively. And they were really talking worldwide, industry-wide. It wasn't even specifically within the IT industry. But you can see these are really the softer skills, right? And also, that willingness and that flexibility to understand that, things are changing constantly these days, and you might be working hard on a project, and on any given day, that project may be, a project that is deemed something that's not in the end going to deliver value. So we're going to stop the project. And I think organizations are trying to do that much more quickly. Today, we're going to stop working on this. We're going to pivot a little bit. We're going to move into a different direction. And so, that mental flexibility, that ability to say like, oh, okay, let me put that down, and let me move to, and work on something else that's a little bit of a higher priority. You can see things like decision making and just how we collaborate with people, and how creatively we approach our work world. Everyone's busy today, and sometimes it's hard. You get used to doing things a certain way, and we all do this. We have things that we know. This is just painful. Surely there's a better way, but we're so busy and we're trying to meet that deadline. We think to ourselves, okay, some other day I'll work on how I can make improvements in terms of how I'm doing things. But being creative and looking at, maybe what are just those small iterative, changes that I can make, so that over time, right, I see great benefit. I don't have to change it all. I don't have to reinvent everything I do. Maybe I change this one little piece of a procedure, and over time, if I change enough little pieces of procedure, then I make that process more efficient and more effective. On the other side of the screen, the topic here is hone your soft and self-management skills. And I brought in this list from Forbes that talks about top tech skills in demand right now. And the reason I brought this in is because I want to illustrate that even in a survey that talks about top tech skills, they're really introducing some softer skills, right? They're introducing, some self-management skills. And when I talk about self-management skills, I'm really talking about things like time management, your ability to manage your stress, your ability to kind of get and stay organized, your ability to learn new things, optimally your ability to teach others and coach and help others learn new things. a lot of how we adapt to new technology, for example, today is we learn from others and we collaborate from others. I don't know if she's on the call today, but one of my coworkers, Chantel, she's got lots of grandkids and kids. And so every time I'm with her, I love it because I learn something new about some cool new technology that she's been using. And a lot of times Chantel's just learned it herself, but she also has the benefit of having kids around her, and she can constantly learn new things. So, that ability to just on any given day say like, hey man, tell me what you're using in order to, whatever, manage your projects or, manage your time, and adapting very, very quickly. So use the new technology that, is emerging. Use yourself as the first guinea pig, and then you can take that into the work world. So understand how culture is evolving, and then look to hone your soft and your self-management skills. Learn about, there are just tons of great books and videos, and there's just so much information available today about things like emotional intelligence and about decision making and how to improve your critical thinking skills. They're not only going to enable you to work more effectively in the work world today, but they're also going to enable you just to be, kind of more effective in your life. And then learn about these best practices. So learn about Agile, learn about DevOps. There's, again, a tremendous number of resources out there. Understand the technologies that underpin practices like continuous delivery. And even if you start out by learning technologies that relate to your specific area of specialization, understand that with DevOps, there's very much a tool chain approach. And so you want to familiarize yourself within your organization about the tools that underpin the value stream in your organization. So some of the things I've talked about, as we went along, just to recap a little bit, just value stream mapping, Agile, understanding how we're increasingly applying engineering practices to things like testing and even to IT operations in the form of site reliability engineering. Certainly, those of you who are involved in IT service management understand those key IT service management processes that interface with DevOps and how those processes are being adapted. We actually have a course called ITSM for DevOps that talks about just that, how to adapt your IT service management processes in support of DevOps and why IT service management is going to be viewed as a constraint if you don't adapt those practices. So learn. There's so much information available today. The great news about the world we live in today is you can participate in tons of great webinars like this that are free, are being recorded, so you can go back and watch them again, or if you miss a webinar, you can go look at the recording. There's tons of case studies available today that talk about organizations, and organizations like yours, I assure you, whether you're in a government agency, whether you're working in a large enterprise, whether you're working in a small company, there's case studies out there that help you understand how companies and maybe your competitors are kind of navigating their way into this new way of working and introducing Agile and Lean and DevOps and our new modern IT service management practices into those organizations. So as always, we're here to help. Let us know what you want to learn more about. We have a portfolio of DevOps related certification classes. We've got Agile related classes, specifically Agile service management classes. And increasingly we're introducing, in these little silver courses down on the end are actually workshops. So not necessarily certification classes, but classes more where you can kind of roll up your sleeves and better understand how this information applies to your specific organization. I always say, make education productive and make work educational. So how can we make education productive? And these workshops really enable us to do that. They can be kind of tailored to the needs of your organization. So as always, I'm running up to the wire. Questions, Karen?
Hi, Donna. I don't have any questions yet, so just a reminder for all of you to please submit your questions now while you have Donna. She's very, very knowledgeable, as you heard, and she can certainly answer them for you. And Donna, you did an outstanding job channeling Jane Grohl, so thank you for that. And I just want to let people know about a couple of things. One is, if you're interested in more information, we have on our website, we have classes that are guaranteed to run, some of those classes that Donna spoke about. So please check out our classes at our website at www.itsmacademy.com. And our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, August 16th. And we have Claire Agater, and she's the chief architect with Verisum, and she's going to be joining us. And her presentation is titled Getting Started with Verisum. But this is going to be so much fun, I think, because what we're going to do is she's also going to have a case study. So Verisum is a service management approach specifically tailored to support organizations to help them succeed in the world of digital services, which is what Donna's just been talking about. This webinar is a Verisum update from Claire, including early adopters, next publication, and what the global response has been to date. But in addition to that, as I said, there is going to be an early adopter case study. And Steve Leach, who is head of service at 6.6 Cloud Gateway, he's going to come in and share his experiences to date as to why they chose Verisum, what progress they've made so far, and the benefits that they're seeing. So please join us. I don't think that you're going to want to miss that webinar. I think that's going to be very, very beneficial.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with Verisum, what Verisum does is really acknowledge the need to blend together Agile, Lean, DevOps, IT service management. That, again, it's not, an either or scenario. Verisum also really looks at elevating service management to the enterprise. So whereas historically, and I did it today, we talk about IT service management, any of you out there who are now extending your service management practices, out to your HR department, for example, or to your, sales part of your organization, that notion of enterprise service management very much comes into play with Verisum.
Right. Thank you, Donna. Thank you for that. I don't have any questions. I have thanks for the webinar, very useful information, very helpful information. And I'd like to thank you again, Donna, for taking the time out and coming in place of Jane and presenting for us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody. That was easy.
Yeah. Thank you. Lots of information. Thanks, Donna.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. And as you log out, just take a moment just to answer our survey. It's just 2 questions. And one is, what other topics would you like to see at our webinars? So that's very helpful for us. And again, we will send you an invitation to the next webinar. And thank you for joining us. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.